You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. I'm joined by my good friend, Mr. Ben Skutnik, aka Dr. Skutnik. I like the attire, the sweater over the collared shirt. Where's the tweed jacket?
You know, it's at the dry cleaners right now. All four of my tweed jackets are there. I wasn't prepared.
So when you got your PhD, did they almost measure you, like kind of like when they do to the masters and they put on the yellow jacket? Did they hand you your like tweed jacket?
Yeah, well, they take us up into the ivory tower and we look upon all the peons down there. And then it's like, like the Masters golf tournament. They put your tweed jacket on and felt good.
Dude, that's a perfect segment into today's conversation. One of the reasons I wanted to have Ben on the podcast, we had him on recently. But now that you have the doctor in front of your name, it swings a big axe. But what I really wanted to discuss, and something that has been kind of ingraining on me, like digging on me after our John kind of clip podcast that kind of went viral. And, I don't know if you've noticed, it has like 300,000 views. I'm still getting comments on it. It's got like 500 or 600 comments, which is great engagement. But I think the one thing that was deceptively clear, almost to the point of depression, was how ill-informed and how much trouble people have discerning their arguments and really just formulating an argument and having somewhat of a fruitful discussion, and that social media and the internet is just kind of melted down into like this Wild West where you can't even have a nuanced conversation with people because, one, they don't understand the nuance, and two, they're just so woefully uneducated to be able to have these discussions.
Yeah, and it is disappointing because in theory that was the opposite of what all of this was supposed to do, right? The internet comes around and then social media comes around. It's like, oh, now you can connect with all these great minds and you can have great conversations, and it's gone a complete 180, right? There are no or very few great conversations happening in social media, and it's really just it's just like a lot of angry people who, I don't know, just need to get their feelings off their chest, I guess. It's really interesting. But hey, I love going in the comment section because it's a fun observation for me just to see like this part of society.
Yeah, no, I mean, I watched you guys wade in there like warriors going to battle, and you guys are highly skilled. I mean, you guys are good rhetoricians in terms of the world. You guys understand argument and how to formulate, and you guys have research to be able to back it up. And to hear you guys spar with people that have never done research, don't understand and have, one, never done it, never read it, and don't understand it if they did read it, but yet are demanding that you provide the research, which now is this like weird fallback position. Like, does your research support this? And you're like, well, let's formulate what that means and actually go into my very first question. When somebody on social media says, show me the studies, but they've never read or don't know how to read a paper, what are they really asking for? And how should a non-researcher, like kind of a layman, actually approach scientific information and literature?
Yeah, it's probably my biggest pet peeve about social media interactions is when people drop that line, because it's just posturing at that point. What I perceive it as, at least, is they've gone to the end of their original thoughts, so they don't know how to go any further. So then they just put up this blockade of like, oh yeah, well, show me the research. And that's kind of a double-edged sword because, one, like you said, chances are they don't have the either skill set or just the experience deciphering that stuff to really know how to go through it. But also, it's like I'll present, and this is what happened in that comment section a little bit about the Judd podcast, is I did bring up research, but people have already made up their mind. And so it's like, I can bring you all this information, but if you're unwilling to waver, then it doesn't matter. And we're just at kind of a dead stop with the discussion. And that's where I kind of check out, because it's like, oh, this isn't fun anymore. Because I do enjoy having those discussions. And, I think and not to be boastful, but I do also have the willingness to change my stance if somebody presents something compelling enough. And that's what I think gets lost here. Oftentimes people will say, oh, well, they'll make some claim, some kind of outlandish claim, and then they'll put it on you to provide evidence that that claim is untrue. But the reality is the burden of proof lies on the person who is making these outlandish claims, right? Like if we think about, something as established as like gravity, right? Now we're to come in and say, well, gravity actually isn't like that. It's like, well, we have hundreds of years of evidence that says otherwise, so you have to prove something compelling, right? And so they don't, and so it just kind of, at that point, when they drop the line of, well, show me your research, I've already checked out because I know this isn't going to go anywhere. And there are maybe some people out there who will change their mind, but I haven't met them in the social media space. And honestly, they're probably not in the social media space because they're probably doing something
meaningful,
more worthwhile. Yeah.
Well, we interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Power Athlete delivers battle-tested performance programming for every kind of athlete. So do you want to go from average Joe to MVP? Then dominate with Field Strong. Get stacked and jacked with Jack Street. Hustle in life and still build muscle with Grindstone. Fear no opponent with Dragon Slayer. Be harder than coffin nails with Hammer. Max out minimal equipment with Lean Enable. Or unlock those newbie gains with Bedrock. Get over to powerathletehq.com/training and choose your 7-day free trial right here, right now. Get lifting, get training, get in shape, all while listening to the rest of this show. One of the tenets of the scientific method is a hypothesis, right? So in science, you create a hypothesis and then you test a hypothesis and then you put the information out to be challenged. And when you're doing that, you have to assume that you could be wrong. And that if somebody brings you a compelling argument or, compelling information that's juxtaposed to the information that you're presenting and that you've researched, then you have to be willing to either back off and say, you know what, either this was incorrect or I wasn't right. I mean, that's where this thing begins. Whereas people come into it with preconceived notions and they are not willing to change. So, I mean, my deal is like, if I ever get to the point where the information that I present is so stalwart and I can't be adjusted, like what we've seen with the CrossFit where, Greg threw that stake in the ground and this is what it is. And even though we read it now and it seems insane, but they have never backed off of this and there's no reasoning and there's no being like, you know what, this isn't necessarily what we found to be true. There's other compelling arguments to say that maybe this is not accurate and it should have been adjusted as time went on and it hasn't necessarily weathered as well as you had hoped it would. But that's like, but then you have like CrossFit claiming to be evidence-based, scientifically backed and created, but yet not willing to adhere or listen to anybody that brings a claim that might potentially say that this isn't doing what you say it is going to be. So like if you can't walk something back or you can't be wrong in science, then that's not really science.
Yeah, it's actually if you go through, the traditional training to be a scientist or be a researcher, you'll actually get weeded out because of that. So the entirety of advanced education in science is essentially just being checked over and over. Are you willing to say you know this and you don't know that? And like the culmination of that would be like your doctoral qualification exams. Typically, it's something like you have a day where you're given a handful of questions, 3 or 4 questions that you have no time to prep for. The preparation is, hey, just know everything that you've talked about up until this point in your career. They give you these 4 questions, kind of lock you in a room. You have all day to write everything you can about them. You hand those questions into your committee, which is a committee of other faculty, usually full professor tenured faculty who've done this for a long time. They read through that, and then a couple days later, maybe a week later, you stand up in front of them, and it's essentially like a firing squad. They're just going to ask, anything you write is fair game. And so if you overstep in your writing, you're going to get buried on that. And the whole exercise is to push you to your limit. Now, they want your limits to be as wide as they can, but push you there, take you one step further, and see if you have essentially the integrity to say, well, I don't know. instead of trying to speculate or trying to, infer something that you don't really know. They want to make sure that you are rock solid in what you know and where that line is so you don't say the wrong thing. And my advisor would always call this perfect paranoia. You have to be perfectly paranoid because anything you put out there is going to be taken as truth. And so you have to make sure it is to you true. And then the flip side is, as things progress, because this is where I get hung up on the CrossFit stuff. That was 25 years ago now. And to say that the science, specifically exercise science and nutrition, hasn't progressed in the last 25 years is wild, because there's been so much progress. And so with that progress, it's not a bad thing if you change, because you knew something 25 years ago, new information came out. It's actually worse if you don't change, because then you just look like the fool who says like, well, nope, don't believe that. And so that's always been interesting to me about the whole CrossFit thing, because at the time, and you know this as well, like at the time it was pretty profound, because what were we doing? We were doing bodybuilder splits and we were doing jogging or whatever, and for the most part that was exercise for most people. So it was this kind of profound, like, oh, there's intensity. But then as time went on, we're like, oh, that intensity isn't necessarily as high as we thought it was, because the research came out to show that it wasn't. Then we thought, oh, and the volume maybe isn't the biggest driver of hypertrophy, so we can't really hang our hat on that so much either. And so,
well, 25 years ago there were five drivers for hypertrophy. It was like metabolic distress and lactate. I mean, there was five established, within the last probably 6, 9, 12 months. I mean, within the last few years, we find that, mechanical tension and working towards failure. And the closer you work to failure and a higher percentage of 1RM, aka intensity, different margins of error is the main driver for hypertrophy. So when you're seeing these people and they're like, oh, it's the volume. No, it's the fact that they're doing movements to failure, where they're doing 95-pound thrusters until they probably can't do 95-pound thrusters. And is there a hypertrophy effect? There is. I mean, in a way, somebody many years ago said, CrossFit's just high rep bodybuilding with short rest periods to failure, and like that ended up being kind of accurate in a lot of ways. And then when you looked at like the high level CrossFitters, they became extremely efficient. The same thing I observed in the jiu-jitsu guys. The best guys in jiu-jitsu are so efficient at what they did that when they wore the heart rate monitors, they were nowhere near the zone 3 and zone 4, which was exactly opposite of me and the beginners. And then realizing that they were deficient in these places. So then we had to start biasing that in their training to be able to balance it out. This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market. We've built an online training business by partnering with Train Heroic to deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Hammer, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training. And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best training tech in the business, head to trainheroic.com/powerathletehq. And now back to the show.
Yeah. And you think about like when you own the gym, somebody shows up on day one out of shape. Yeah, it's super intense for them, but then they've been there for 2-3 years. And this is like the life cycle I always saw when I was in the gym. People who've been there for 2 or 3 years. Well, now this, 1 hour a day, I don't quite get the same stimulus. So then they branch off and they either go into weightlifting because they want to lift real heavy weights, or they go into, powerlifting, or they branch off because they find it's just not enough to keep driving adaptation. And so that's kind of what gets lost here too, if we're talking about nuance. It's great for the beginner. I mean, if somebody's coming off the couch, cool. You're doing some resistance training, you're doing some conditioning, that's great. But that would be like saying the training that I did as a freshman in high school would have worked for me all the way throughout college. And that's just wrong, right? And we know that because of science. We know the principle of overload is a scientific principle. And so, yeah, it's interesting that people are still so dug in, because it reminds me that there are people who are still new, right? Yeah. Because I was there in 2009, right? Telling people like, oh, you just go and lift weights. Like I do CrossFit, right? But then you're out of it.
What I think happened was that nobody had really put this like glycolytic capacity to test. in terms of like a massive stream. Like if you think about, the NSAM model was like, you build the strength and then you have to do, zone 2 and you build this aerobic capacity. And like even, Boyd Epley with, the metabolic conditioning cycles for Nebraska. And then if you also go back and you look at, Zadaskorsky and Verkhoshansky's work, there were blocks of metabolic conditioning that were glycolytic heavy in their kind of pre-training model and kind of a preparatory phase. It prepped like the nervous system and got like ligaments and tendons and everything ready for more advanced training. What had happened was at that point, they had kind of just had it within a certain phase within the training. Nobody had just like been locked in and been like, we're just going to like port this phase over for as long as we can. And we're going to see how far the adaptation drives. And what I think they found was that there were outliers. There were like the Rich Fronings of the world and Matt Frazier. And there were these guys that were kind of outliers that could handle a ton of volume and intensity and, endless amount of workouts. And they were just, not in a bad way. But do you remember the Simpsons deal where Homer goes to box? And he's just standing there and he's so thick-headed that the boxer just punches him until he's so tired that he falls down and Homer wins. That's, I'm a huge Simpsons fan, obviously, but that's a good analogy. Like these guys were just had the ability to be able to handle the most amount of volume, execution, and work in this deal, and they were just able to do it better than everybody. And you get this kind of like segmenting the market. And then on the other side of it, there was a segment that just absolutely imploded. That got fatter, that got weaker, that got sick. And instead of being like, hey, we should research why that's happening, they just didn't do it right. They didn't eat this. And there was other exposed, they just couldn't handle it. They're not who we needed. And we just pushed them away. And we focused on those individuals instead of saying, all right, well, we did this as a massive experiment. What did we learn? And more importantly, like how do we take what we've learned here and create kind of a more efficient system, which I think is what a lot of people have moved on to do.
Well, and that's the thing. It's interesting because, HQ still holds the same ethos that they did 25 years ago. But all of those individuals that you're talking about who did succeed at a high level, they branched off and now they do their own programming, which, it all looks, I'll say, a little bit more like what sound programming should look like. And again,
like Power Athlete.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't think it's coincidental that all of these programs now hinge on, well, we're going to have some big lifts as our primary part of the day, some accessories to support those lifts, and then throughout we're going to pepper in some conditioning at different intensities just to make sure we're touching that, right? And so I do laugh about it because it's like, maybe everybody went to a CrossFit football seminar along the way and kind of came up with it. But again, I mean, you can skin a cat 1,000 ways and nothing is really too original. So it's not a knock on those folks, but it is funny how all of those individuals have done that, but now it still gets put under this umbrella of, that's CrossFit training. And it's like, okay, like, because everybody or everything is, right? Because they did a great job of wordsmithing it so they could bring in anything that was effective or anything that was good. They could say, oh yeah, well, that's CrossFit. And it's like, is it though? I mean, it's not. Yeah. So anyway,
what are the steps to understanding when you say like, hey, because I get forwarded a ton of research, and what people tend to forget is that to do research, it cannot be broad. It's got to be very segmented. Like if you're trying to prove one thing that, all mice that are born on this day all have a tail of this color, then like that's a very, very specific ask. It's not like saying like, well, I'm going to test that all mice that are born have tails. Yeah. And like what they forget a lot of times when you read a lot of research, it's looking for one very specific thing because research cannot be general. I mean, you can aggregate like 100 research articles and say, hey, based on these 100 research articles, I'm going to make this assertion or this stance or this position, but that's kind of aggregating information. But a lot of times when they're like, oh, well, here's one specific piece, what I think that they forget is that research is never broad and inclusive. It's always very specific.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. And so the first thing somebody should do if they want to read research or if they've come across research, read the title because that'll be descriptive of what's going on. And then before reading anything else, they should ask themselves, how would you test that? Because that's where I think a lot of the issue comes, not necessarily the information that the researchers find, but individuals who aren't in the scientific realm don't really understand the methods involved in research design because, like you said, it is highly controlled. Or I should say, lab experiments are highly controlled. We can go kind of a step out and go into field experiments that lose a little bit control, but also those claims can't be made as strongly because we've lost that control. And so understanding methods is the first step. So trying to figure out in your own head, how would I test this? If I come across an article, actually I was going to send you, there's one about childhood type 1 diabetes that I was going to send you because it showed that increased physical activity had essentially benefits on those children with type 1 diabetes. But it's like, okay, so something like that.
Support with my son, where, if he goes out and he plays and he goes to baseball and he runs around, his blood sugar tanks and we have to reduce the insulin in his pump. Like literally we have a sports mode and that's what it is, right?
That's awesome.
And so also direct sunshine. Like if he goes outside and sits in direct sunshine or gets in front of the red light for 15 minutes, way less insulin, to the point where, like, if it's overcast and he just goes outside, like let's say he were just to sit inside all day, his insulin demands would almost be 2 or 3 times, like 2 or 3x.
Yeah. And so, but looking at that title, it's like, okay, so how would they measure this? Well, what they did was they controlled everything else that would be influential. So diet, other lifestyle habits, things like that. So they could really just manipulate physical activity. And then they looked at some type 1 diabetes markers on the back end, right? So just understanding that kind of concept first. How would they test this? Meaning, what would they have to control or not allow for change to change the one variable they're interested in? And how would they do that? And oftentimes, people who don't know science will say the questions they're trying to ask can't really be tested because they can't fit that model. And that's okay, because the way that science works is in very small, very logical steps. So the first question might deal with one aspect of what they're interested in, and then there might be more studies later down the road that test it over and over. But starting with the methods, just to understand how could you set up an experiment to test this would be important. And then once they kind of read through that and understand how they did what they did, then they can check the results. But probably the second most important part of the article, I feel like, after the methods, is going to the limitations, because in every article, we're required to write all the limitations of the study. So essentially acknowledge, hey, here are the blind spots. And oftentimes those limitations lead to new studies. But the problem is people will just read the abstract of a study. And the abstract really just highlights the results and then the broad conclusion from the results. And so they miss out on all the nuance involved that would give more context to what they're trying to say, right? And it's not just people who read the abstract. This is also, on like Huberman's podcast or other science communicators, they oftentimes just read the results and they don't highlight the limitations. And whereas researchers, we see those limitations. So then when we find new research, it's not necessarily as, as much of a bombshell, because then we can see like, oh, but there's all these things that they didn't think about. Because oftentimes we'll run this experiment and halfway through we'll be like, oh shit, we didn't think about controlling for this. And so then you have to put in limitations. So understanding the methods, understanding the limitations, that kind of sets your guardrails for how the science is conducted. And then the rest of it is pretty simple. The results, I mean, there can be some jargon in there that maybe is hard to understand. But if that's the case, if you're somebody who's just not really comfortable reading science, like you said, what we can do is aggregate hundreds of studies and we put them in to either kind of what are called reviews or meta-analyses or things like that, where they take all of the research, synthesize it down. So they don't run an experiment, but they just give you kind of the Cliff's Notes. And that's where I think a lot of people could start, because that's going to give you an informational primer on all the stuff. Now, the problem is it takes a while to do that. Creatine is a great example. Creatine's been being studied for decades, right? And, just really probably in the last 10 or so years, are we getting a lot of reviews or position stands that are saying these broad sweeping claims about creatine, because it took us so long to get enough studies to make these claims. And so, as a researcher, we're okay with that, because that's just kind of how it goes. And we look to just make that next step. But I think sometimes the layman looks for science to answer these huge questions, and the question just can't be answered that way.
So Also, can you make a distinction between science in terms of like the scientific method and anthropology? When I kind of talk to people, I'm like, you have to understand there's science and anthropology, which is, the observation. Like I'm observing people and then I'm making, judgments or claims or, observational statements about what I'm observing is anthropology. And that's a social science, and that's not a science in terms of the way we understand it. So like a lot of times when I, I'm guilty of this too. I mean, after you observe certain things over and over again, you start kind of formulating some observational statements like, hey, I've made this statement that I saw a remarkable difference in the physiques of NFL players that trained over 85% and those that didn't. After you do this for 10 years and you watch like the guys that lift heavy weights and the guys that never put on heavy weights, there was just a difference to the point where you see the guy with his shirt off or, you see him in his pads, whatever, like he just had a different appearance. And it wasn't necessarily like I wasn't doing science. I wasn't understanding, that there's, differences in hypertrophy and muscle and structure based upon heavy loading. I mean, I wasn't getting into any of that. It was just an observational statement that I made just by training in there and seeing who went heavy and who didn't. And then I could tell you within an inch, like, I bet that guy lifts heavy weights, right? Like that's anthropology. I'm making observation after viewing a whole bunch of different people. It's not as if I went in and, put everybody into a scientific study where we tested people that trained at 85% and those that trained at 65% and then measured strength and muscle biopsies and went into all that. I didn't need to do that for the fact that like my observation was there. But at the end of the day, it's still an observational statement and that's not science. I can go dig in and find the research that backs that claim. And there's people like Tom Newman and other people that have done this, and you have done it as well. But a lot of times, a lot of the scientific stuff starts with kind of some observational, hey, and I'm sure this happened with the type 1 diabetes. Parents saw when their kids got more exercise, they needed less insulin. And, somebody, postulated and, theorized and said, hey, you know what, like, let's test this. Let's see if really non-glucose mediated uptake really takes effect in with these kids with type 1. And so I think science starts with asking the question, maybe off observation. But if the basis of your information is all anthropology observation, that's a social science and not real science.
Yeah. And that's, it's kind of tricky because you have to consider expertise there as well. So, when I was at Louisville and I was embedded with some of the athletic teams there, the coaches weren't scientists, but they had decades of high performance experience. So I would have been foolish to not take their observations with some weight, right? And yeah, that's typically how science, we'll call like lab-based science, physiology and such starts, is there's some kind of observation made. And what we usually go to is like the epidemiological studies. So these are like surveys of hundreds of thousands of people, give these answers, and they just find relationships or associations. So this is also where a lot of people mess up, talk about red meat, right? People will say red meat causes cardiovascular disease. And it's like, no, the epidemiological data just showed that there was an association. But maybe in that same paper, it also showed that smoking was associated with red meat, and maybe drinking was associated with red meat. And then you can start to build this idea of like, oh, maybe these are some people who go out, have a few drinks, have a cigar or a couple of cigarettes, and have a steak, right? And it's like, is the steak the problem? No. So having that context, right? So we usually look at...
Or they get drunk and they burn the shit out of their steak. And then they're eating a charred black... steak that's extremely well done, which
I'm full of carcinogens.
Yeah. And then now they're consuming carcinogens, which anybody that's ever, had like a Saturday barbecue and, working the grill knows, don't drink until the food is done. Like I've done that, like here's a cocktail. Next thing you know, you're over there making terrible mistakes and bombing out the dinner. So my deal is if people are coming over, I will not have a drink until the meat's cooked. And then once I sit down, now I'll have a drink.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we look at the epidemiological data, and we make a hypothesis based off of that. Oh, that's interesting. Red meat causes cancer or causes heart disease. Well, how could we test that in individuals? Well, maybe we could feed them a diet of red meat over a certain amount of weeks and test these markers for cardiovascular disease, right? So then it becomes this very controlled thing because we would, in the in the criteria for people to enroll in the study, we would say things like abstains from smoking, withholds drinking to a minimum of whatever, 1 drink a week or something like that. So we could make this criteria so that the individuals there are only going to be tested on that one variable, the red meat consumption, right? And so that's how, our biological sciences work. But again, I don't want to discount what you're calling the anthropological side of it, because if there's somebody who has, established expertise and has seen thousands of instances of some phenomenon, oftentimes that's going to be more valuable than when I read an epidemiological study, because, again, like when I was at Louisville, it's like, oh, you were dealing with very specific people for decades and you came to these conclusions. That's very valuable to me, because oftentimes science moves much slower than everything else, right?
Yeah,
Just because
it was Charles Poliquin that said, if you have to wait on the research, you're going to be 10 years behind. And then also Louis Simmons, who was, so incredibly intelligent in his way, almost to the point where, like, I think he had early autism in a way, where his ability to see patterns in this, and he changed all these variables, and just to have time to sit with Lou and talk to him about strength training, like he figured out things under the barbell that, I don't know if science will ever figure out, just for the mere fact that he wasn't constrained with actually having to be ethical in anything.
Well, and that's the thing. There's a lot of red tape involved with science, and science requires funding, and science requires subjects. Whereas if you're a Louis Simmons, you have your subjects. Your athletes are there. They're going to do the training. If they don't do the training, kick them out and get new athletes, right? So in the world of sports science and exercise physiology and things like that, feedback from the field is actually, I think, just as important as the epidemiological studies, because the field moves at its own pace, or people who, so my kind of scope is with swimmers, and it's like these swimmers are swimming, 20 plus hours a week, they're in the water all the time. If they have something that is in their mind based off of their training, well, it's going to be a lot harder for me to simulate 20 hours of training in the lab to try and decide that. So I don't want to discount the expertise observation, but for it to truly be tested in the scientific way, it needs to come into a lab, and that's a controlled test, and it's not sexy at all. It's actually pretty sterile and pretty boring, but again, it progresses that logical next step. And so in enough small steps, you get to kind of big claims, but it just takes a while.
Well, I mean, in 1992, when I first was exposed to creatine, when I went to college at Berkeley, I continued to take creatine. And at that point, they were telling us that it was leading to hamstring pulls. So they told us to not take creatine because it was effectively pulling water out of the muscle, and which was leading to hamstring pulls. And I never had a hamstring pull, so I continued to take creatine and figured, like, oh, if I get a hamstring pull, I'll stop taking creatine, and I didn't. It allowed me, when I started taking 20 grams a day and was taking 30 grams and 40 grams, and we tried to up it, like I saw that the extra water that I was carrying was actually helping me reach a certain goal in terms of body weight, because they used to weigh us that we had to hit a certain body weight. So I just knew that if the creatine is pulling water, I didn't think that like the body systemically could like pull water out of your hamstrings and deposit it into like subcutaneous body fat. That didn't really make a lot of sense to me, that they're like, oh, it's pulling water out of the hamstrings. I'm like, well, where is it pulling the water to? Like, is that water leaving the body? And they just made these kind of grandiose claims, and then it's a performance enhancer and you're going to test positive. I continued to take it, and that never happened. So, and now all of a sudden we had, people that thought creatine was the devil and like it was this, and now all of a sudden here we are over, 25, 30 years later, if not, 35 years later of research, and it states now it's curing everything. It's helping people, live better for, dementia and Alzheimer's. It's, helping people fix cognitive issues. I mean, even one I saw recently where if you're hungover and you have decreased cognition associated with like, alcohol consumption, that 20 grams of creatine will, basically reboot the system in such a way that now you can reach cognitive, to the point where we're recommending it to college kids. Take 20 grams of creatine before you go in to take your test, and you'll have higher test scores. So, I mean,
Man.
it feels like a long bridge from like, don't take this, you're going to get hamstring pulls, to now you're going to go take creatine as a performance neurogenic aid or no, it wouldn't be neurogenic, it'd be neurological aid for kids that are in college taking tests.
Well, that's because I was the same. So in 2003, I tore my ACL playing football. And the same thing, my football coach, I was taking creatine, and he was like, "Oh, it's because you're taking that creatine, your ligaments dried out." And it was funny because it's like, no, I tore my ACL because the safety went high-low on me as I was running a crosser pattern and blew my knee out. Like it was like, no, like it just happens. And so it is interesting though now because, yeah, it just, people are quick to let their fear take hold, right? The fear of the unknown, that is. So they're not quite sure about creatine, or what are some common ones now. So after creatine, it was beta alanine.
Yeah.
Oh, it makes you tingle, and that's not good. It's like, well, that actually doesn't matter. In fact, probably the tingling means your beta alanine stores are too low, and you need to saturate that. So,
and once you start taking it after the tingling goes away after a few days. But I've also heard people with beta alanine talk about like, oh man, I can't take it after 12 o'clock because I can't sleep. But I've also heard the same thing with caffeine, where, you know, I worked with a guy that couldn't have a coffee after 9 o'clock because he was going to be fucking a zombie. Whereas I could probably drink an 8-shot Americano 5 minutes before I go to bed and go right to sleep.
Yeah, I think that's the adaptation that comes with kids. I think you cross that bridge. It's like, oh, okay.
Like I can't, like whenever I meet people that are like, oh, I don't drink coffee, I'm like, do you have kids? And then if they say yes, I'm like, there's no way. They must be doing something else, like meth.
I need 2 cups just to feel alive. But it is interesting because, just like you said, so we have on creatine, we have all this data to essentially, and rightly so, make this claim that, hey, everybody should be taking it. You know, we have a 3 and a 5-year-old, and they take 1.5 gram gummies in the morning. Like, everybody should be taking it. But the reality is, there are still going to be individuals who are outliers, and that's where people, if they happen to be one of those, then they think like, oh, I can't believe any of this science. And it's like, well, no, that's not the case. You're just unique, right? There's something going on with you that this just isn't working as well. And I think people forget about that as well. When we make these broad sweeping claims, it's just based off of a statistical probability that they're correct. But in reality, there's always that 5% chance that it's not correct. But that's a bet that will hedge every time.
What about nicotine? Like nicotine was lumped in with cigarettes and cigars and kind of smoking. And we know that, you know, voluntarily inhaling excess amounts of smoke as burnt tobacco in your lungs is probably not the smartest thing to be doing. Like we have a lot of, like, we don't need to study that. Like, you know, especially in the smoking deal, like it's a little different than drying your old tobacco in the old days. I mean, you know, the amount of carcinogens and toxins that are in cigarettes, is like almost too many to count. And all you have to do is go through, and I think it was it RFK or one of those guys that fought that big tobacco, and they went and they had to release all the toxins and all the shit they were putting in there to make it highly addictive. I mean, that's why people were dying. So like, it wasn't the nicotine. But then now it started with nicotine patches and nicotine gums. And now I can't go to jiu-jitsu without seeing dudes with like 5 nicotine pouches in their mouth. Yeah. And then they're the first to tell me like, oh, it's not addictive. And I'm like, ew. I've been around some guys that are like, their hands start jonesing, like, you got a nicotine patch? Like there was a shortage and people were going to start like fucking robbing banks to try to get nicotine. But then I've heard people relate nicotine consumption to everything from like, it'll make you impervious to COVID to time travel. And you're just literally lumping it in to where now, like if you don't have 5 or 6 nicotine patches in your mouth at all times, you're not going to live another week.
Well, I don't think maybe it'll help with time travel. No, but so nicotine, it's really interesting because it was for the longest time just associated with smoking, right? That was the delivery mechanism. And so it built up quite a stigma, but and maybe this would be a Waldman question because he's more of the nutritional biochemist guy, but the way that nicotine acts in the body is almost identical to how caffeine acts in the body in terms of the outcomes. So caffeine it fills your adenosine receptors, whereas your body actually has nicotinic receptors in it. And so there is, much like, whatever, 10 years ago when the cannabis stuff came around, there is a cannabinoid system, right? There's also these nicotinic receptors. So your body is primed for it. And so it's really been interesting over the last few years because, there's been a lot of data with nicotine about it being a neuroprotectant. Well, again, kind of much like caffeine can be in moderate doses, right? So I think it started with individuals with dementia, I believe, is where they started showing that, hey, it can kind of reverse some of the symptoms, maybe ward off some progression that we'd normally see. But I actually just came across a study the other day where they gave nicotine patches to children with neurodivergent children, so children with autism or ADHD, and it brought their symptoms down as well. And so, it is interesting because on the one hand, is it addictive? Yeah, it's highly addictive. Again, much like caffeine. The issue is caffeine, even though it's pretty easily accessible, you can only drink so much before you're going to like piss your pants or whatever, right? But with those nicotine pouches, especially, people eat those like candy. And the reality is with all things, right? The ideal situation with all supplements, whatever it is, creatine, nicotine, whatever, the best thing you can do is use the minimum effective dose, right? Because that's just the most logical way. If you can get the most bang for the least amount. But the problem with nicotine, you buy those pouches and they come in their can or whatever, and you have them on you. And so then it's just like mindless. And I've seen the same thing. I've seen, I do think combat sport athletes maybe more than others, because I've seen some wrestlers. And guys will be, putting in 4 or 5 of them at a time. And it's like, let me do the math. Those are each 6 milligrams. So you're putting in 30 milligrams of nicotine, which is like a pack of smokes. Like, what are you doing?
I think with athletes, they're extreme. So if one's good, 10's better. So, but it's pretty interesting. I mean, I have, when I was pretty young, we were trying to talk to some older girls. So we thought it'd be cool to smoke some cigarettes. And I still remember that first cigarette and the burning in my lungs and never smoking again. I remember, going to a concert with some guys when I was in high school, and they were like, "Oh, here, you want to try this dip?" And I will, to this day, I mean, it's been years. I mean, probably 35 years. If I smell chewing tobacco and dip, I still get nauseated and it takes me back. So I just did it that once. I felt spins. I felt sick. I didn't throw up, thank God. But I never did it again. And, even, having smoked a few cigars, that little bit of nicotine, it just, I think people prefer something different. I kind of prefer a coffee. I like, even though it fits within that, but I mean, I didn't realize or even know what it was until all of a sudden these guys were had all these patches. I'm like, what the shit is out of your mouth? And they're like, oh, and they showed me, you want one? I'm like, I'm good. I don't need another, I don't need another thing to associate with. And, but there's people that are into it. And I think, but the issue becomes that people make it all encompassing. And I think and I've heard people with these different claims, oh no, it starves off dementia and this. I mean, they literally went through a list. And I'm like, oh man, this thing sounds super fantastic. I'm surprised that we're not giving this to babies. So.
Yeah. Well, and it's does it have those potential effects? Sure. But not if you're 6 beers deep at the bar and gone through a whole can, right? That's not how it works. It works in those situations, those individuals. It's very regulated and things like that. So, I think people, I think people have the best intentions, right? When it comes to that kind of stuff. If they hear oh, it's good for my brain, well then, I'm going to do it. But also it's are you checking all these other boxes first? Because we know regular exercise or, holding off on excess carbohydrates, all of those things have a much greater effect on your brain than nicotine. So it's just an interesting,
So the same thing I do with my private client here is I break everything into active and passive. So what's fascinating is the amount of people that will heavily invest into passive modalities. I want to lay in a light bed. I want to sit on this and get in a hyperbaric. I want to do take a creatine or this, opposed from exercise or being able to do something that's active, zone 2 work, aerobic. I feel for every passive kind of modality or passive thing. I need one active to balance. And then the problem is if you do kind of an inventory of like the things that you're into, you'll realize that the majority of what people gravitate towards are the passive thing because they're easy. Right. Like, instead of working out, I'm going to lay in a light bed for 30 minutes. Okay. I'm going to, instead of doing the zone 2 stuff, I'm going to have a coffee and a nicotine pack. Instead of, learning and doing a new sport, I'm going to do this. So, I mean, it's just like everything we talk about every time I see him is like, whenever he presents something to me, I'm like, you just keep showing me a lot of passive. What are more active things that we can add, like going for a walk? If you want to balance this one, what about meditation? I mean, all of these things. Speaking of which, did you see that thing that went viral with that pretty Jack Black dude in Miami with like
Ashton? Is his name Ashton, right?
My God.
You saw he got evicted?
Yeah, well, he got evicted because I think he was giving out key fobs to people, is what they said. But first of all, if you're getting up at 3:15 in the morning to put your face in a bowl of ice, like that whole thing was just I just shook my head, and like that thing went viral, and then all of a sudden people are doing it, and I'm like, it reminds me of the ice bucket challenge, and like that went viral, and now it's just water, like face, like cold water, which reminds me of every time I've ever woken up hungover of just basically splashing cold water in my face to get my shit going. But yeah, that one blew me away. All right. So I think we covered a little bit of like understanding what the research is and how to approach it. Number 2 question. A lot of people hit the gym. They lift heavy, maybe carry some muscle, but they're still sitting at 20 to 25% body fat and calling it healthy. And I'll use my quotations for fingers for those of you not listening. Are we using that word just because we strength train, even if the diet is loose and kind of out of shape? What does research actually say about the kind of body composition and when it comes down to long-term health and longevity as it relates to body fat and energy expenditure?
Yeah. Health is complex, right? So that's kind of the big thing first is in the social media space, especially when people talk about like the healthy at every size movement, right? Well, health is multifaceted. So you have your mental health, emotional health, blah, blah, blah. Let's pare it down to just physical health, because that's what we're talking about here, right? And so the way it's kind of like what you just said, the way I look at physical health is there's two components to it. There is the physical state that your body is in, and then there are the physical habits that you do to put whatever stress onto your body, right? So we can be healthy physically in 2 different ways. And so when we have individuals like this, I think they are, we'll say, more healthy than not, because they have to gain muscle. That means you have to have a healthy behavior of lifting weights. So that's a good thing, right? So we are good there. But the reality is, when it comes to our bodies, nothing exists in a vacuum. And so even if you're driving this good physical behavior and you have a healthy physical trait of increased lean mass, because that's also good, our body drives itself towards homeostasis, right? The balance of everything. And so we can't disregard everything else. And so these individuals who are, that 20, 25% body fat, which I think also it's important to say, we're talking men here, 20 to 25% body fat. I don't think men have a good grasp on what that looks like because they can't see their back. That's whenever I talk to nutrition consults or anybody who's looking to like lose weight or whatever, I always say like, all right, well, where are you at right now? Have you gotten a DEXA scan? Well, no. I was like, okay, well, if you had to guess, where are you? And
15%.
typically men will say like, oh, about 15%, because they maybe can see their abs, right? Maybe they can flex and see their abs. So then I say like, all right, so shoot me some pictures so I can kind of assess. Their back is, back fat, like that's just it. And so we forget about that. There's things behind us. It's not just what we see in the mirror. And so I think a lot of men underestimate the amount of body fat they carry, and at the same time overestimate the amount of muscle they have, because then it's just a math thing, right? If you're 200 pounds and you actually have 25% body fat, well, that means that you only have 150 pounds of lean mass. But if you think you have 10% body fat, well, then you're going to think that you have 180 pounds of lean mass, right? And it's just not how it works. So there's those things. But these individuals, I think I think they are saying they are healthy because in one aspect they are lifting weights enough to gain muscle. But in terms of our body is, you can be healthy in that aspect and still have an unhealthy body because adipose tissue is pro-inflammatory. There is no denying it. Plenty of research about it. Specifically, it gives off what are called cytokines. Those are inflammatory agents, essentially. And two in specific would be interleukin-6 and TNF-alpha. Those are the two cytokines that it gives off. And we know that. All adipose tissue does. Even if you're in that healthy range, which for men, I don't know, you asked if literature says, I don't know if there's a stance per se in the scientific community, but I think it's pretty well agreed upon. If men are between 12 and 15% body fat, that's a real healthy amount of body fat. Because anywhere below that, and you might see an impact in your androgen profile, so your hormones, because our hormones rely on fat to be built. And so if you're too lean, your body won't have the stores to draw from. And, for the women who are listening, 12 to 15% for the men. For women, it's a little bit wider because of childbearing and things like that. So usually we'll see something like 20 to 24, 25%, something like that, depending on your build. Some women are a little bit slighter than others, but men are a little bit more concrete in that 12 to 15%. And so even at that leanness, your fat tissue is going to be giving off inflammatory markers. But because you're only 12% body fat, your body can handle that. The inflammation that it's giving off is actually helping your immune system kind of stay in check. When we get too fat, so 20 plus, well, now we have too much inflammation. And so we get what's called low-grade systemic inflammation, where just everything is inflamed. Joints are inflamed, organs are inflamed, it's all inflamed. And so no matter how much you exercise, let's say you spend 2 hours in the gym 7 days a week, there's still 22 hours where you're not offsetting that inflammation. And so when we talk about healthy, yeah, I think it's like what you said, the passive and active. It's really hard to lose weight. Like, it is hard. Yeah. And it's a lot easier to just say, hey, I'm going to bang weights for an hour or two and really give my best there.
It's way more fun. Hands down. I mean, we're in the seasons of annuals, and the annuals that we do for Power Athlete, when you sign up for the annual during the season, you get a consultation, and I do a ton of them, and so do some of the other coaches. And one of the interesting pieces I get is always like, how do I lose fat and gain muscle at the same time? And we've done endless podcasts on it. We've done, I don't want to say the empirical data, but we've done it ourselves, and we've done it within this, that, to consistently eat in caloric restriction while eating a high protein diet and lifting weights is really the recipe for that. But one of the caveats, and I always tell people, is you're going to be hungry. Are you okay being hungry? And, the different strategies I employ when I'm hungry, like I drink a coffee if it's earlier in the day. I drink, water with Element Salt Pack if I'm hungry. Like, instead of a lot of times, and I call this the hunter-gatherer mode, when all of a sudden I get hungry and I start kind of like circling the kitchen, trying to stay away. And I'm like, I just make a beeline, and I go and I basically pour a big glass of water, pour some Element Salt in it, a whole pack, and I smash that. And then I'll be like, if I'm still hungry, then I'm like, shit, now I'm going to be in trouble. And then you start counting the minutes to your food. Like, that was me last night. I took Cash to baseball, and it was from 5 to 7. And he got done hitting at like 6:15, 6:20. And I was like, you ready to go? I'm really hungry. I want to eat dinner. And he's like, Dad, I want to stay around. I'm like, just get in the fucking car. Let's go. And I just rushed him home because I had steaks to cook and I was starving. And, like, when you're all of a sudden low on your calories, you have to be okay. You have to have some strategies employed. One of the ones I like to do is kind of push my calories out. Like, I'll fast in the morning and just eat my calories later in the day, because I'm not always as hungry in the morning, but I also know it's going to kill my performance. So there's a lot of strategies to employ, but being in caloric restriction, and the only way you know you're in caloric restriction is if you step on the scale and you're lower. But the body is super smart. It knows it's going to hold on to stuff. It's going to be, it's going to start, tripping things in the brain to force you to eat. I mean, it's not an easy process. And, the easiest way to do it is obviously eat less, but also using a little bit of aerobic work to kind of get into a caloric deficit, but not too much. I've seen guys be like, oh, I'm just going to eat 2,000 calories. I'm like, yeah, good luck with that. And then what's going to happen is you're going to do it for about 6 days. On the 7th day, you're just going to absolutely smash, and you're going to be able to like reverse everything. So like small deficits. But I don't realize, or I don't think people realize how hard it is to get in shape. And they're like, oh, I'm like pretty good. I'm like, dude, everybody should at least once really diet and see if they can get under 10% body fat, down to 7 or 8, and then how long they can stay there. I did it and was able to stay for a couple weeks, but then all of a sudden you're like, dude, I don't want to be this hungry all the time. I'm tired of going to bed hungry.
Yeah, and this is where I draw on my experience as a college swimmer. I mean, we were walking around sub 10% all year long. As the season went on, when we got into heavy training, we were probably, around that 6-7%. We were super lean. We also were super sick all the time. We had upper respiratory infections all the time. We mono. I went to nationals my senior year with pneumonia, because our body, when you're that lean, your body can't protect itself, right? So it sucks. And the amount of, I just remember on probably like a every other day basis, I would go to Walmart and get this big bag of trail mix. And then in the course of 2 days, I would just smash that thing. And we're looking at like 13,000 calories. But in that lifestyle, it worked. And this is where I think people also make a mistake. Those individuals who bang weights but are a little fluffy still, they bang weights. And then in their head, they say, okay, I just worked out. I worked out really hard. I need to replenish right now. To an extent, yes, get your protein in, because your body needs to rebuild protein. But if you have excess fat to that degree, 20, 25% or above, you don't need to replenish the carbs. Will you be a little bit hungry? Sure. Will you feel a little sore, maybe a little bit longer? Sure. But if what you're doing is replacing everything you just burned, well, then your body's not going to have to burn itself for anything, right? So there's also that mindset, because again, we've heard for the longest time, like, hey, you have to fuel, like the anabolic window is 30 minutes after. And it's like, well,
no, that's bullshit.
Yeah. It's like, again, though, if you're trying to shed 20 pounds of fat, maybe you shouldn't listen to what the anabolic window literature says, because maybe they're not talking to you, right? Maybe they're talking to the 6% leaned out bodybuilder that's trying to make massive gains. If you're trying to lose weight, exactly. I tell people hunger's the merit badge, right? If you're hungry, you're doing it, right?
The only person I've ever met that, for those of you guys that don't know my wife, Kate, she's super jacked. Like, she's always super lean, and
I can agree. I can contest to that. Yes, she's
fucking jacked. And she's the only person I've ever met who can be super lean and like doesn't have to be hungry. She's like hungry all the time, so she eats constantly. She's like, dude, like, I've never seen anybody more religious in her food, but she's super lean. And and when I ask her, she's like, no, I just, refill and I don't really feel hungry. And I'm like, I literally have to turn into like a crazy person to get that lean. Like, I have to be so hungry. I mean, like going to bed and you're like begrudgingly going to bed because you're hungry, waking up.
Yeah, hungry. No, that's just it.
And that's, like I like that's happened to me. Like, I go to bed hungry, you go to sleep, I get up first thing in the morning and I'm hungry. And it's just like, I'm hungry all day. Like last night, it was hilarious. I literally would have eaten everything I must have eaten, like, honestly, it had to be probably close to like 24 ounces of steak of sirloin, which is super lean. So it was like 1.5 pounds. I smashed it, and I was like looking in there, and I was like, I'm going to eat those peppers. And I started just randomly eating vegetables that do nothing that are not satiating in any way. And so I ate this whole package of these like sweet pepper things that the kids have, and I was like, this sucks. I fucking hate every ounce of this. We,
my wife and I are both going through doing a little bit of a keto lean right now, because I haven't ran keto in a long time. And, people are in the Discord, they're always talking about it. It's like, okay, let me revisit it.
Keto on Jack Street?
Yeah, but I've talked to her about the targeted keto. So she's not doing the 20 grams of carbs. She did for about a week, and she was like, I feel awful. I was like, yeah. And so she's given a little bit more breathing room. But yeah, just the other night, we put the girls down about 7:30 or 8. And then typically we like to watch a show or something for about an hour. Put the girls down, and I was like, hey, I'm going to bed. She's like, oh, you're really tired? It's like, no, I'm just starving right now. And that's the only thing. It's like, because I'm going to find something. I'll go eat hot cocoa mix out of the cabinet. I don't know. Like, I need to go to sleep right now because I can just tell. And that's the thing. And people might say like, well, that doesn't seem very healthy. And it's like, well, probably not. But that's also why people shouldn't be perpetually leaning, right? Hit it hard, but then have the discipline on the back end. Once you release the vice of, okay, caloric restriction is off, have the discipline to not go back to what you did before, because that's what happens. And actually, that can be worse than if you lean down, but then you go right back to what you're doing, you could be in a worse state, because then there's a likelihood that you'll build more visceral fat. And so when we talk about body fat, there's subcutaneous fat, which is just under your skin. There's visceral fat, which packs your organs. And the visceral fat, that's the stuff that leads to diabetes, that leads to all the diseases, because it's more metabolically active. And so that's actually what started
known as old man hard fat. Like when you see the old dudes, I see this at jits. You roll with some guys and they're just like fucking like hard as a rock. And you're like, that's a lot of fat around the organs, dude.
Well, and this is the thing, it can be tricky because there can be people who you can see visible abs. And so they look lean because you have like the markers of like, oh, I can see your abs, you have some vascularity in your arms. But if they have a high amount of visceral fat, they can still have all the negative health consequences, right? And so that's the thing about this is people, I remember when fighting.
Is there a way, I mean, body fat is body fat, right? Like, I mean, whether it be subcutaneous or visceral, I mean, how the body stores it, obviously. I mean, it's, I remember reading, I think it was actually research that was discussing about like fat locations as it relates to all-cause mortality, that, you know, like the jiggly kind of subcutaneous fat people tend to be healthier than people that pack fat around their organs. But if you're tend to like, you know, you're eating in caloric restriction, you're lifting weights, you're doing all the things you should, you know, so too, is the body going to release fat at kind of an equal distance? It's not going to like burn all the subcutaneous before it gets into the visceral or vice versa.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think to answer that, we have to see how they're made, because yeah, in a sense, fat is fat, but the deposits are made differently. So subcutaneous fat, that will largely just be because you're in a caloric surplus, right? Whatever, you're not exercising enough, you're eating too much, whatever. Visceral fat starts building when you've had enough subcutaneous fat that your insulin resistance starts to increase, because then that causes this kind of vicious cycle with the liver that starts dumping fatty acids around the liver. And so then we start to get, I mean, that's why non-alcoholic fatty liver diseases become huge, because that is an end, or not even an end result. That's part of the process of developing type 2 diabetes.
Well, what's wild is that research, did you know that that's a newly coined term?
Yeah.
Like that didn't exist anywhere in the literature.
The only time they saw that kind of fat packing was when people were alcoholics. And that's because when they're alcoholics, they're working on overdrive in their liver. So it packs fat so it can have readily accessible energy. So yeah, the non-fatty acid or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, that's a big issue. But the problem is once that starts, then it's really tough to control, right? So if you're somebody who is 20% body fat, but you actually eat pretty well, meaning whole foods, single ingredient foods, not a lot of highly processed stuff, you're probably working with mostly subcutaneous fat. But if you're somebody who is 20% body fat, but you do the high fat, high carb processed stuff, then you likely have a decent amount of visceral fat. And so the way to decrease that is to get rid of that processed stuff, because then that's going to help bring the insulin resistance, your insulin sensitivity back. So caloric restriction is how you drop fat kind of wholesale. But if you want to, I hate using the word target because it isn't that specific, but if you want to really focus on that visceral fat, that's where you drop a lot of the high carb type stuff. And so that's actually one of the benefits of the ketogenic diet. And that's why it's used in therapy for type 2 diabetics who have really progressed.
Well, I mean, doesn't this stem from like, you know, the liver can only process so much glucose or glycogen, whatever, and then the excess spills out as triglycerides go up, and then the body just stores that as, you know, subcutaneous, that kind of that hard fat that kind of packs around organs and gets that old man like iron gut type of shit. Yeah,
that's exactly it. So when your insulin resistance is up, your pancreas is working in overtime, and so it's signaling to your liver to also work in overtime, and so then it's just like this vicious cycle that really is. I just got done teaching actually in a class, and I don't think people, because we hear about it all the time.
Did you get accused of fat shaming?
Actually, no. Well, kind of. Yeah. But
I always wonder, I mean, because I did a minor in nutrition when I was at Berkeley. And so I had to take a bunch of these classes. And they would make these kind of not interesting, but very matter of factual claims in the pictures that they put up of obese people, and this person is insulin resistant and based upon this, and this is the kind of the mechanism. And now I think in today's world, back then we were just oh, fat people are insulin resistant, right? They showed us the picture. Now I could see people being well, that's not very nice.
Yeah, I had to, because that's the thing, the ADA, the science says obesity is the number one cause for diabetes. So that's medical information. But we have to, it's kind of like how I talked about health earlier. I have to kind of set it up like that. Hey, what we're going to be talking about is one aspect of health. There's a whole bunch of aspects, blah, blah, blah.
So PC
what's that?
It's so PC. I mean, do they still use the word PC? Or has it morphed into something else in academia?
I think it's creating an equitable and comfortable or something like that learning environment.
Gotcha.
I'm the king of PC, man. What are you talking about?
Well, so when I use the word PC, my kids don't even know what that means, because if politically correct in today's political landscape, doesn't really fit, because now you have, Trump in power and Doge, and this whole political landscape has changed so dramatically.
Never thought about that.
Oh yeah. No, I've this is where I have, having kids is extremely interesting, especially with the vernacular and some of the words that I use. And then they ask me well, what does that mean? And they're and it's slightly confusing to them. The things that we would call a side hustle or a side project or someone working off on the side are now referred to as side quests. They were Dad, I was in the shop, and they were yep, in the shop working on your side quest. I'm side quest? You mean in Zelda? I'm going off to do a little mission? And they were so it's pretty funny that these things have worked in that kind of have when I brought up well, that's not PC. Now, what is PC and politically correct? And they were what does politics have to do with this thing? I thought, Trump attacks people. To be politically correct would actually be assaulting people, or it's completely changed. And I love it. But the thing is I like this discourse with my kids. They are actually at the point where they're shut up. The daughters have no desire to engage in this stuff at all. They get out of the car and slam the door now. And I'm I guess my time here is well spent and done. I need to go, I need to move on. So sorry. Don't worry. You'll see this coming with your daughter soon enough.
Oh yeah. We're getting there with the 5-year-old right now, but yeah, so no, it's kind of bring it all back together. Yeah, I think those individuals who are carrying muscle but also carrying fat want to say that they're healthy. One, because they want to feel like they're doing some good, which they are, right? You're lifting weights and you're doing that. That is good. But I just feel like the narrative, and this is typically how I work with the nutrition clients that I work with, is let's remove emotion from this and let's just be honest, because you can feel like you're doing good, but you're still going to age. And if you're in a less than ideal state, that aging is going to happen faster, and it's probably going to have worse outcomes. And so, getting people to understand, it's like Goodwill Hunting, it's not your fault. It's not your fault, right? Getting them to understand that, hey, we can come back from this, right? But it's going to take some behavior change. It's going to take kind of a new attitude, and it's going to take some accountability. And that's what people really don't want to deal with, because, when I had to go to bed because I was so hungry, that's accountability, right? Because it's I know without a doubt that over the course of the next hour, I'm going to find something in the kitchen and just be smashing plain tortillas or something. It's going to be gross. I'm not going to be happy with how I spent those calories, and it's going to take me away from my goal, right? So, that accountability stuff, and that's why coaches help and things like that. But you also got to be self-accountable.
Yeah. No, I think that there's, that's why the vegetable thing was funny, because I'm there's no calories in these red peppers, and I literally must have eaten 30 of them. And the funny part was I was momentarily full, but it was not satiating in any way, and I was more mad at myself for eating them, because now I'm gonna have to go buy more, because the kids are what happened to all the peppers? I'll be I ate them.
Yeah, that's how my wife makes this really good orange chicken for the girls. So orange chicken and rice, and they love it. And we were having that the other night, but I was having my salmon and spinach. And my 5-year-old was why are you having that again? It's like, I don't know. I don't even know anymore. Like, you're having all that rice. I want that rice. I'm going to eat my fish.
Or my wife made the kids chicken. So she did like chicken in the Instapot. And what we'll do is we'll throw the deer sausage in the chicken just to give it actually a decent taste, because I hate chicken. So like, I'll be like, how many deer sausage are in there? And then the kids will eat the deer sausage. And I'm like, God, I just get the chicken, you selfish bastards, stealing all the good stuff out of the Instapot. Yeah. It's funny. It's almost, and then when the kids ask questions, I'm like, just eat well and exercise, and you never have to get to this point. I'm like, you're not going to have to battle any of this stuff, you guys know. But then what's pretty interesting, and the girls are at this point where they're still kids, but they're kind of becoming these young adults, and I have to talk to them about not emotional eating. Because when they were 5 or 6 or 7 or even 8 or 9, they could like emotionally eat and just crush shit, like just absolutely like sit down and slay like all of these chips and still be like this. And I'm like, I was like, what happened when you were 9 or 10 is not going to happen when you're 13, 14 or 15. And that's like an interesting thing that I can't necessarily broach, but I tell Kate to. I'm like, Kate, you got to, and she's like, I know, I got to talk to him about this. And I'm like, yeah, like you guys are, hypocaloric and also some of the things. And, Kate's pretty good. She's way better than I would be. I wouldn't buy them any of this stuff, but she kind of like allows them to come and pick some stuff out. And it's, it's an interesting balancing act. All right. Asked and answered. All right. Number 3, one more. In today's world, doing your research just means watching a YouTube video of Dr. Mike or Huberman or asking ChatGPT. How do we make sense of that? What's the line between being curious and actually being informed? And like that term of like doing your research, which we kind of answered, but like I'd like to dig in a little bit where like, you have all these experts, and let's say like Huberman and Dr. Mike and just endless amounts of YouTube. I mean, the fact that like YouTube is the greatest search engine on the planet, and if you have a question about anything, you can find somebody pontificating about it. And now there are these kind of bastions of like intelligence, let's say like Huberman. And I mean, there's entire Reddit forums that are like hacking Huberman, where they go through every one and how do you do this? And by the end, you get to realize that like 6 episodes later, he completely goes opposite of what he said 6 episodes before because the research is current. So like how do we like, as we're kind of going into this landscape where now like there's YouTube and now people are just trying to aggregate more and more information on Gronk and ChatGPT, like how do we navigate this where, people don't really understand what they're saying, but they're just parroting it because they think that their heroes, their Mount Rushmore believes this.
Yeah, there's, it's that appeal to authority, and it's strong. It's interesting when I think about all of this, especially Huberman. Huberman gets me really interested because, you were Gen X, right? Remember when the idea of selling out was like the worst thing ever? Like, oh, I can't believe you sold out. Yeah. And he's like Mr. Punk hardcore skater kid and making tons of money, but an absolute sellout, right? Like it boggles my mind of now the goal is to sell out and to get all of this acclaim. So then you become a louder voice. And I also want to say, the Dr. Mikes, the Hubermans, Andy Galpin, all those people who have big voices, they absolutely are qualified, right? They've done the work. They're not faking their degrees or their pedigree. But I think what people don't realize is now they're in the business of clicks and engagement and sales and all of that, which in this environment relies on a little bit of polarization or a little bit of, finite statements or, things that can get people going. And so there's a little bit of that, right? That's a little bit of the movie magic, because in reality, what I think people don't understand is in science, there's constant disagreement. There's camps think of any topic you want. We talked about the hypertrophy stuff. There are still camps that believe the big 3 are the way that we drive hypertrophy, right? And so that's actual researchers still being on different sides. So science isn't in full agreement on anything, but these individuals, when they present it in a way that this is the word, right? This is how it is. And so then people who, again, don't understand science and everything, all the nuance involved, take it because they are an authority. They are actually accomplished. They do have the pedigree. And so they just assume, this is correct. But then it's also a game of telephone. So maybe they hear Huberman say one thing, they only take about 80% of that and then pass it on to somebody else. And then it gets morphed into like,
Sure.
What are we talking about? And so, yeah, doing your own research is important. But what does that mean? Well, first, I would say that means finding multiple sources, right? So, if Huberman is telling me one thing, and if it is valid or if it is valuable, there should be a few other people supporting it as well. And now this is where it gets tricky, because what people will do is they'll go to Huberman, and then they'll go to like Rhonda Patrick, who is essentially in the Huberman network, and then they'll go to Atia, and so it's like, that's not really different people. That's just different platforms.
No,
different people.
We had Gabrielle Lyon on, and she's in her protein thing, and so these people all kind of fit within the same kind of paradigm, and they're all kind of like, I think that they all kind of gravitate, and they kind of just see what's kind of what's hot and what everybody kind of fits. It's very rare to see somebody in that kind of, I don't call those individuals biohackers. That's like the Gary Britas and that fucking shithead Dave Asprey. But these guys are obviously doctors, medical doctors, PhDs, researchers that are pushing information that I don't necessarily know if it's harmful. Like the last Huberman one I watched had to do with red light, and I was laughing the fact that the doctor is like, oh yeah, red light and sunlight, and here's all the benefits, and I'm like, so we're children of the sun, like, and we know that vitamin D and all that, like it was incredible that he did a podcast on the benefits of like red light and sunlight and how it did it. I just didn't know that we had to tell people that. But then I read a pretty interesting observation. I don't know if it was research or observation, but they were talking about the de-evolution of people in the UK. Because 98% of their time is spent inside and away from like direct sunlight, and they're seeing a de-evolution, what they were calling within the jaw, that they're seeing this reversing of evolution. And I'm like, no, they're just not getting enough sunlight. Like all of this stuff goes away if they just get more direct fucking sunlight.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I don't think so. In the business, we call it communicators. So they are communicating science to the masses. And I don't think it's bad. I think it's good in theory. Where it gets into trouble is those receiving it don't have that toolbox to really decipher it. And so, I do think people should do their own research. And actually, ChatGPT is not a bad place to start if it's a general question, right? How do I drive hypertrophy? It's going to give you a pretty good answer. Yeah. But it's not going to be able to give you a lot of nuance, right? And you can form your prompts a certain way or whatever. So that's not a bad place to start. But the biggest thing, when people say, oh, I did my own research, what they're actually saying is I looked it up. They're forgetting that research is actually an active process. I'm in the lab manipulating something, doing something, and making observations about that. And people forget that. So, if we say, everybody should take, 10 grams of creatine a day. Somebody might say, oh, yeah, I did my research because I heard John Wellborn's podcast say take 10 grams of creatine. The actual research on that would be you going for the next month, taking 10 grams of creatine and seeing what happens, right? That's actually doing your own research. And people don't do that, right? For whatever reason, because they don't have the means to, or they don't, whatever. But that's a big part of research, is the actual active process of research. And so if you're going to do your own, that means you have to actively do something. It's like how you and I have talked about it before with like the coaches who, I call it like mental masturbation. They read all the books, they have all of this information, and they're like, oh my gosh, I've done so much research. It's like, but you haven't applied any of it to any athlete, so you have no idea if it works. You're reading about how it could work, but it's like reading the old Russian literature in training. It's like, oh yeah, all of this could work. Oh wait, I have to be juiced to the gills for a Bulgarian squat cycle to actually work, right? Otherwise I'll implode. Well, and how do we find that out? Because we all do Bulgarian squat cycles without being juiced to the gills, and we implode.
No, I mean, we have a program that I've never actually ever put out to the public that was called the Bulgarian Power Athlete, that was based off of a presentation that Eva JF did to some high school football coaches. Somebody sent me the presentation in a mock program that I adapted over into a power athlete cycle, and we did it. And I squatted like between like 550 and 600 for 18 days in a row. And on the 19th day, we decided that like do a little bit of conditioning, and on the 19th day, everybody imploded. I mean, but like, so like, you know, we tested that. I mean, we threw ourselves on the funeral pyre and set it up. That's what I think was just so fascinating in this CrossFit stuff, where these people are talking to us. I'm like, no. We lived like the glycolytic capacity life. I mean, you were, you know, a swimmer. I mean, you know, like swimmers, I think people don't give swimming enough credit for the fact that like the amount of load that you can do in the pool will far outweigh anything that you'll ever do on the ground, for the fact that you're, you know, in the water, it's unweighted. And then also, you know, the constant thermogenic effect of like trying to keep your body warm in 75-degree water, which people don't realize. I mean, people have gotten hypothermia in 75-degree water. So the effects and like the metabolic pathways that are built with swimming are pretty insane if you think about it. And then, you know, you come from that environment and you come to CrossFit, like kind of like, you know, similar. I come and I'm like, you know, thinking, all right, maybe the piece of my training that I'm missing is biasing glycolytic capacity. So then you basically go into this, you know, glycolytic capacity heavy training program, and you set your body on that funeral pyre, and then you realize this isn't good for performance. This isn't good for athleticism, and this isn't good for longevity for me. And, you know, I think you found it. And so what was interesting in those exchanges is that people forgot that, no, we did this, right?
Well, yeah.
We moved past this, and I traveled and taught this. So like, it was just fascinating. Like, so this is something that I tend to do, and maybe this comes from academia or whatnot. Like if I'm going to argue with somebody, I'd like to know who I'm arguing against. And this is just because I'm not a fool. If all of a sudden I'm gonna, let's say somebody says something and I go back to them and this, and then I come to find out that like this guy is the world's expert on this topic and this is what he's done. And it's like Waldman talking about, magnesium and some of the things. Like I default to the experts, especially for the guy that's doing the active research. And he's like, my mentor has 30 years of research in this magnesium. Like, talking to like, Dr. Sabine on like on the gut biome. I mean, you tend to find like, I'm not going to argue some like fool's errand because I think this, when like, this is the lady doing the research of the person. So whenever these things happen, I always click through and want to know who I'm kind of conversing back with. And that gal that was kind of, trying to battle us, I clicked through and I looked at her stuff, and she was relatively new to this coaching thing and relatively new to CrossFit, and still had the, the braids in her, or the bows in her hair and the knee-high socks, which I haven't seen since like,
oh man,
like the early 2010s. And like I could hear her arguments, which were very new CrossFit. And I was like, I even said to her, I'm like, I know you're new at this thing. How do I know? Because I clicked on your profile and I saw this. And your arguments are from a very new person that's like, we've done this. Not only have we done this, we did it for a long time and we've evolved past it. And now we're trying to offer a little bit of like lighthouse to, and there was, so I always wonder whenever, and I've had people make comments about pro football and this, and I'm like, when it comes to pro football, especially offensive line play, like I can give you a pretty accurate assessment of what's going on. Oh, you don't know. Well, actually I do. So that's what I feel like on the internet. People just battle with people, not necessarily knowing, like, it's like showing up at jiu-jitsu and being like, oh, I'm going to beat up this dude. And like, you're like, oh shit, that guy's like a 20-time world champ. This guy's going to smash me into a million pieces. It's good to like, that's why they put on belts.
Yeah.
And that's why, when you meet this guy and you're like, oh, that guy's got a lot of stripes on his belt. This guy's probably pretty good.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I think a lot of people don't operate this way, but I think you do, and I know I do, where it's like, I want to, if I'm going to engage in a discussion or a point counterpoint or an argument or whatever you want to call it, I'm going to do a really good job of trying to research that other point as much as I can. And that's what got me with all this CrossFit stuff. People would say things to me and it's like, hey, you don't understand. I actually still hold a level 3 trainer certificate. Like I've been in that. Right. And actually that one chick, I told her that. She came back, she's like, oh, you just don't know.
I was
and I told that chick, I was like, hey, go in the trainer directory and look me up. Right. Like it's not, and I get it. So I'm on Reddit too. And I get it all the time in there. And people are like, how could you be a level 3 and say those things? And it's like, well, I think kind of because I am, because I've been around long enough, like it's okay to spot the flaws in these things. And that's going all the way back to what we talked about in the beginning, people forming arguments. To form an argument, you need to have a requisite, not a full comprehensive, but a requisite amount of knowledge of the counterpoint, right? Otherwise, you can never actually argue anything, because what you're going to be doing instead of arguing is just yelling your point over and over instead of refuting their points. And to refute somebody else's points, you need to understand the holes in the argument. And that's how programs evolve, and that's how training evolves. And so again, with the CrossFit stuff, it's just interesting to me because it just hasn't evolved, because they've been so, not only are they unwilling to listen to the holes, if you have a big enough voice, as you know, and you spot some holes, they just shut you out. And then do their CrossFit propaganda stuff to make you like, oh, this person he's the worst, he doesn't get it. And
my favorite was in that somebody sent me a clip from that Box Life thing. They called it the CrossFit Football Initiative. He was in charge of the CrossFit Football Initiative. I'm like that, like those words have never been used together, like, which is why I know it's ChatGPT nonsense, but they tried to downplay the fact that, like, didn't even mention that I was a professional. Like it was so amazing. Like the hit job was so bad on AI that I read it and I was like, my God, this is the death gurgle of this entire movement. Like is snapshotted in that. And I mean, to some extent too, you know, if you think about, you know, the zealots at the end, you know, the fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, all of these things. And it's kind of a sad indicator that, like, you know, CrossFit was so impactful for changing a lot of people's lives by giving them a little bit of fitness, getting them into barbells and this. And what these guys don't realize, because they're parasitic, you know, the Hillers of the world are parasitic off of the clicks. He's pushing this because it gets him clicks and it's how he makes his dough. But he doesn't realize that, like, what he's doing is effectively driving people out and increasing the speed of the death gurgle.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting because 25 years, right? Well, let's say 20 years, because probably 2005 is when CrossFit really started spreading, right? It's pretty local to California before that. But 20 years doesn't seem like it's that long, right? I can remember a lot of things from 20 years ago. But in the CrossFit space, it's been long enough now for enough generations of newcomers that they completely forget things. And that's what got me about this whole argument with the CrossFit football stuff in the first place. People, you know, there's the Zach Thielander, the Box Life thing. He talks about you like you're just some guy. And it's like, oh, because you weren't around long enough to know the whole story. Like, he was an NFL player who Greg went to. It wasn't just some guy who started his own program. And so people don't know the history. And again, if you're going to form a good argument, you have to know the background. You have to understand the background so you can talk about that instead of ignore it. Because in all these comments, people would just ignore it because they didn't know how to handle it. And your line about, you know, the greatest trick Glassman ever did was convince, people all took that as, well, I never heard him say that. Well, it's like, no.
They obviously never read the first CrossFit journal, number one, because it says that exact statements.
Well, but the thing is, it's like, John is saying Greg convinced people. John is not saying Greg told everybody this. He convinced it by a whole bunch of actions. He created the CrossFit Games. So now people who do CrossFit are athletes in a sport. He changed the lexicon. Everybody called him Coach Glassman. Well, you're just a personal trainer, bub. Like, you're not a coach.
Did you know, I remember I got interviewed by CrossFit HQ, and they asked me for, like, who were people that were highly influential in my athletic journey. And I talked about, you know, Rafael Ruiz. I talked about Todd Rice, George Zangus, you know, Coach Hone, you know, Jeff Horn. I mean, like I talked about all the coaches I'd worked with, and they were like, well, what about Coach Glassman? And I was like, Greg never trained me, and we never worked out. And they, like, wanted me to put his name in there. And I was like, he never, even the day that I was at his place, we went into his garage and he had a dope garage gym. I thought we were going to do something. We just sat on the couch and drank beers. And I was like he never influenced me. He never trained with me. Like there was nothing, like, not like, hey, let me put you through a workout. So there was never that. So I was like, I can't necessarily count him as a mentor in that, you know, in that situation as a coach to athlete relationship. And like, they were like, so, it was actually Saban was so, or whoever, I think it was maybe Brian Devaney or no, it was Tony Budding. I'm sorry, Tony Budding. Had such a like
way back.
Oh yeah, such an well, what was interesting about Budding is he was the original zealot.
Yeah.
And you know what happens to the first zealot? They usually cut their throats, and so he got cast out. And I remember when he called me after that, I was like, well, I mean, did you not see the riot coming? You were by far the biggest prick of the whole thing. So, but he had this like almost like defeated, like, could you just say what I need you to say so we have this on camera? And I was like, like, I'm not going to be disingenuous and lie about something that didn't happen, which is also interesting where, you know, people in that, in those comments were doubting one, that this happened. And like that was hilarious. I'm like, no. There was an entire program across football that came from this conversation. Like, that's the proof of this thing. And then what they, you know, on that fucking dipshit on the box thing, like you said, like I mean, just goes to show you that thing has, 0 knowledge. The fact that he just plugged in and had some AI prompts and then just cut and pasted it to be just a terrible hack job, which is so fucking embarrassing. But yeah, I mean, just didn't, like you said, like not doing any historical research or realizing that maybe these people have the historical, like ability to be able to say this and have.
Well, again, it goes back to what I said about like what you call the anthropology side. People who have that years of expertise in the field are valued and trustworthy sources. You had interactions with Greg, which again, this is also, they forget that for CrossFit football to happen, Greg would have had to agree with you. It's again, like Greg agreed with your statement and they're fighting for Greg in a statement that he agreed with. And so it's so crazy. Yeah. He did a really smart job on Savan's podcast of not saying one way or the other, right? He was like, oh, well, I don't, very Glassman-esque and being vague, but
we call people don't Glassmanian.
Yeah, he's a Glassmanian devil. No, but people, I mean, again, people get emotionally involved in things, and it's great that CrossFit means that much to that many people. But gosh, I mean, it makes me wonder what the rest of their life is like. Because if you're this closed off to things, like my wife is a assistant principal at a high school, and it's like, I bet you are just the worst parent for the administration there. Because if you're, if Greg Glassman can't be wrong, it's probably, oh, my kids aren't wrong. And it's just like, that's crazy. And when you add in the very public documentation of Greg across those 20 years, and people are like, oh, I'd never believe that he would have done that. It's like, oh, well, I got another story for you. Would you believe? And it's like, I don't know. It's crazy to me that he's still
revered,
got people on the hook.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's, and my whole deal, and I think what they're hoping for is that, CrossFit's up for sale and that he's going to somehow swoop in and save them. And I bet you that guy doesn't come within 1,000 feet of this thing. He, no. He's already got his new initiative. I think it's something
like med or broken science or
initiative. Yeah. So he's already moved on. He's taken his money. I mean, like, he doesn't want to wade anywhere near these waters.
Well, and for all that we're saying, he is a very bright individual, and he knows his legend.
He's a smart motherfucker.
Yeah, his legend will always be bigger than any change he could bring now. So if he bought it now, it would do nothing but diminish the legend that is Greg Glassman, because he was there. They were the best. Reebok deal. We're on ESPN, this and that. No way he's coming back, because he knows none of that's going to come with it. So he's a smart guy. He'll stay out. And then he can also stay out and say, well, I would have done this. It's whatever. Yeah.
No, it's genius. I wonder, I was kind of thinking a little bit on this. Like, I don't know if anybody wants to come in and buy that thing unless it's on such a deal that they can pick it up for pennies on the dollar. And then, I've kind of imagined that maybe it's that deal where like the employees come together and kind of it becomes like almost like maybe, finding a way for them to crowdsource all the CrossFit affiliates into, contributing money to, I don't know who backs that thing. I mean, they paid $200 million. I'm assuming that Summit, was it Summit Partners? Warren Buffett, who's behind.
Oh, Berkshire.
Yeah, Berkshire. I don't see him taking a massive tank on that. So, I mean, even if they were to sell it for 20 million, they take, 10 cents on the dollar. Like,
well,
I'm just interested to know who looks at this ship and says, hey, you know what? I can, one, rekindle this, or I have to buy it at such a discount that actually it makes money from day one.
I mean, you and I both ran gyms around the time where it was still peaking, right? And back then, people were still coming in because they're like, hey, I've heard about CrossFit, so I want to see what it is, right? So you needed your name to be CrossFit whatever to get those people in the door. But now everybody knows kind of what it is, at least. And so I just don't understand what if somebody wanted to open a gym that did CrossFit workouts now. I don't understand why they would pay the money to be an affiliate when anybody knows if I go to a gym and there's rubber mats on the ground and there's a pull-up rig and there's barbells over in the corner, they're probably doing CrossFit here, right? And so if that's the main revenue, I don't know, and the numbers are showing affiliates are dropping, they're hemorrhaging those. I just don't know where the value is because the CrossFit Games also, which I will say, I typically enjoy watching the CrossFit Games because those people are very impressive. Like they have impressive capacities in all aspects. But even the CrossFit Games now is not, because Glassman fired all the media team and all that kind of stuff, the production quality is poor. So it's just not as exciting to watch anymore. Yeah. And if those are the two big rocks, it's like, well, where's the value? I mean, I don't understand who would buy it because I don't understand how you could transform it into being something successful again.
Well, it's interesting if you look at High Rocks. It's amazing in the consults, the amount of High Rocks questions I've been getting. I mean, I don't think there are High Rocks gyms. I think there's High Rocks.
There are actually. There's a High Rocks affiliate program.
Oh, is there an affiliate program? Okay.
Yeah.
So there's, High Rocks started as a competition. And people were doing the High Rocks competitions as it grew. I think it grew into a model, not vice versa, which is fascinating because CrossFit started as gyms and then grew into a sport. And now you have something that's a competition. I don't know if it's a sport per se, but you saw, like, we were on our group chat, and was it Tia Claire Toomey, competes in High Rocks now and looks dramatically different. She was, pretty big and jacked. And now if you look at her, she's a much leaner version of herself, a much smaller. So you can see that she's kind of morphing into, said principle, specific adaptation to impose demands. The demands are different. So now she's morphing into a kind of a different kind of vehicle. And it's funny that most of the former CrossFitters are kind of morphing into this kind of higher. The CrossFit thing was too many variables. I mean, obviously somebody, that poor guy dying in the lake in Texas. Whereas now I feel, and one of the comments I heard, it feels a little safer. I know what I'm getting myself into. I'm not going to show up and this guy's going to have me do handstands over a flaming pit anymore. And I think what happened, at least from the consults, is people like to know, like, hey, I know what I'm getting myself into. I need to decide whether or not this is a go or no go, opposed from showing up and being like, okay, we have a pit of sharks with laser beams on their heads that you have to swim through with meat tied to your legs. 3, 2, 1, go. And you're like,
well, that's the thing. The novelty of, we train for the unknowable. Like, that sounds really cool until you actually are trying to compete in a sport that believes that, because then how do you prepare for that other than doing everything? But how many of the top CrossFit athletes now, the top ones from, we'll say, like 2015 are just injured, right? Because all of the volume, or, potentially have to take some kind of, androgens or something so they can manage that volume. Whereas I think, what people enjoy about High Rocks is it's the same event. Every time you're going to run 8 1-kilometer runs, you're going to ski, you're going to row, you got wall balls, you got farmer's carry, right? So knowing how to train, or knowing exactly what you're training for, makes training a little bit more enjoyable, because then you can set metrics, right? You can actually tell, because it just ended, CrossFit Open just ended, but this is my biggest pet peeve. People are like, I got so much fitter from last year. And it's like, you did different tests than you did last year. how can you can't compare that. Again, people don't understand science. You can't make any comparison there because it's a totally different thing.
Sure.
And the same thing at the CrossFit Games, different events all the time. Again, impressive to watch them do that, but it's not a testable outcome. Whereas High Rocks, yeah, it's the same event. And yeah, Tia does look a little bit leaner, but again, if you're having to run 8K at essentially threshold while also doing, I can't remember how far they have to do burpee broad jumps and all that other wild stuff. It's like, yeah, you're going to want to ditch that muscle mass that you don't need. Like that's how it works.
No, I'll say it. I watched the CrossFit Games for watching hot chicks work out.
Yeah.
Scantily clad. I'm like, I definitely appreciate the girls. They wear scantily clad outfits to work out. I'm like, I will be the first to say it. I dig it.
Yeah. And again, like me being like with my swimming background and being kind of conditioning junkie, like it's like, man, like I see them, I think
like
one of them
just rode a fucking marathon.
Well, that's the thing. So literally this is
like
how into it
3.5 hours on a rower. Like
they did that. The very next day I went down to the gym and I was like, I'm going to fucking row a marathon. It's just like, so I was in the crazy. So in all these discussions on social media, it's like, hey, I was there. Like I did that too. But it is, and that's kind of what gets lost in these discussions too, is like, we can have an appreciation for some of the things. Like these athletes at the high level are amazing. And yeah, there are individuals who, instead of doing CrossFit, they were sitting on their couch. So it's really good for them, but we can also have an honest conversation. I just did on Reddit the other day, some guy was on there. He's like, hey, I'm 6'3", I'm 350 pounds. I'm doing CrossFit, but I'm really, really exhausted and it makes me overeat. And I was like, in the comments, I was like, hey, I'm probably going to get lit up for this, but you should probably just do 4 to 5 days of strength training for a while. And of course, the comments under that, like, no way, no, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, listen, the guy is 350 pounds. He's trying to lose weight. CrossFit has him exhausted, so he's not going to be compliant. Maybe just do something like lifting weights where you're not burning yourself down every day.
Or just walking. Like get up in the morning, go for a 30-minute walk, come lift some weights, and monitor your calories. I mean, if you look at calorie balance, I've always kind of like, this is a constant kind of back and forth in my mind, where I'm like, is it easier to eat less and be in caloric restriction, or train into caloric restriction? And Dr. Tom's deal was always like, hey, let's figure out what your basal metabolic rate is, eat that, and then train into caloric deficit. And that's always been like kind of in my mind, but I've realized now that, like, to be able to come in and like you start doing it, like let's say even if you get on, do 30 minutes and hammer on the bike, you might burn 300-400 calories. I mean, like what's 300 or 400 calories? Like that's like a cupcake.
Yeah.
So like you almost need, like, I wish that when you're doing like the aerobic work or you're training and you kind of like look at the calories, instead of telling me how many calories I burned, I wish it could equate it to food. You just ate, or you just worked out for 30 minutes and you worked out the equivalent of 7 tortilla chips.
Yeah.
Like, I think that would put everything in much better deal. So like and you guys could, I'm probably sure this already exists because we're thinking about it, but I want a fitness app that when it translates the amount of work and calories and everything, that it translates into food. So now I can see it be like, you burned 1 cupcake, you burned half a cheeseburger, you did, like a 20-ounce soda. That's how many calories you burned today. Like that would be more beneficial to me.
Well, there's that guy on social media. That's his whole thing. He'll eat like 3,000 calorie meal and be like, I'm going to run as long as it takes to burn off these 3 calories. And he runs like 40 miles. And he's like, all right. And I burned it off. And it's like, that sounds horrible.
Yeah. Dude, we did, it was funny. I remember back in the day, we did a 5K row to warm up every day. And so I saw how many days in a row I could do a 5K. And like, I could do like pretty, like if I hammered, it was 20 minutes, 25 was probably about what we did to be nice and consistent. So it'd start with like a 25, 30 minute 5K row. After doing that for 30 days, I don't think I've ever rowed again. Like I still have rowers. They're covered in dust. We never use them. And like people ask me on like the Echo and all that. And I'm like, I will never do this again. Like I've never used that rower ever since. Like the minute I sit on there, I'm like, oh God, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. It's interesting, but no, you mentioned, exercising yourself into a deficit, I think, is a great way to start. But the problem that people don't realize is over time, you become more economical, right? So if people are like, hey, I'm going to I'm going to jog 30 minutes a day to get myself into a caloric deficit. Well, over time, you're going to get better and better at running or jogging or whatever. And so it's going to be less jogging. So you'll be spending less calories to do the same amount of work. Your economy is going to get better. So that's the one problem with trying to make it a long-term solution of exercising into a deficit, because you're going to have to exercise more and more, and you only have so much time, right? Whereas like this is why college athletics was great, because it's like my schedule is based around exercising. So like I'm just going to exercise whenever and eat whatever I want. Yeah. But adulthood, not so much. And this is going back to that Ashton guy that you talked about. He's a prime example of why I don't take fitness advice from anybody who doesn't have kids. And it's like, you don't, like, you just don't understand.
No, I 100% agree with you. But I'm going to end the podcast right now on that note. So thanks for tuning in to Power Athlete Radio. If you guys want more, we'll have Dr. Ben Skutnik on again. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you. Hey there, Power Athlete Nation. Big shout out to all the heavy hitters who stuck around till the final whistle. If you've been soaking in the knowledge bombs and epic tales we've been dropping for free, here's your chance to be a game changer. Swing by klfi.com/powerathlete and toss a few bucks our way to keep the podcast fueled and firing on all cylinders. That's ko-fi.com/powerathlete. Your support makes a difference. See ya.